Okay, so this is a quick video to Jake and Hugo at the Bible Reloaded. Page, a YouTube channel I'm actually somewhat of a fan of. I don't watch very much of their content, but that's only because, honestly, I don't have the time. But I think that their dissections of the Bible were great, and I think the fact that they had the balls to do the Quran Reloaded was also great. But that doesn't change the fact that they're wrong on the Patreon issue, and I guess I will tell them why. So Jake tweeted out, "It seems that Sargon did indeed have a dialogue with Patreon and chose to end his relationship with them." It's not really what happened, Jake. But he's taking this from the New York Times article. So apparently he's fine with education and reform being done by Patreon. And this is based on the idea that if someone has breached Patreon's policy, then the company contacts the offender with a specific plan, which usually involves asking for the content to be removed and for a public apology. Well, as I've shown multiple times now, I didn't breach their policy, and I can't remove the content, because it was never on Patreon to begin with, which is why I never breached their policy, and I don't really see why I should give a public apology for something I didn't do wrong. But Patreon told the New York Times that the company told Mr. Benjamin, that's me, that it would freeze his account and that he could appeal. Mr. Benjamin objected and said that the video in question should not fall under Patreon's rules because it was on YouTube, and not Patreon, which I think is a fair interpretation of their terms of service, given how their terms of service specify that it has to be on Patreon. And Jacqueline herself, repeatedly, even in this New York Times article, says it needs to be on Patreon. As Jack Conte said, on Patreon. The amount of on Patreons I hear from staff at Patreon is kind of creepy, given how they're judging me for things that didn't take place on Patreon, and are not manifest observable behaviour. His response when we told him about the reform process, that sounds all ominous, doesn't it, was to nitpick and say I was being anti-Nazi, which I don't really think is a nitpick, it's demonstrable truth. But Miss Hart said, "You cannot use those words on our platform, it doesn't matter who you're directing them at." Well, that's not true, is it? That's a demonstrable falsehood. You absolutely can use the N-word on Patreon. I mean, loads of people use them all the time. It's just all on there. No matter who they're using them at, it doesn't matter about the context, they're using those words. But it's okay, I guess, because these people are black and I'm white. So I suppose they've got a free pass on this one? Is that how that goes? It's a word they can use and I can't, and I get punished for it if I use it, even if I'm insulting Nazis. Never mind, I suppose that one rule for one and one rule for another is the progressive way. But I want to correct Jake, because obviously he didn't watch my other videos on this subject. So on the 6th of December, around 20 to 12, I think, at night, so I didn't get it until the next morning, Sydney from the Trust and Safety Council sent me this. "Hi, my name is Sydney and I'm on the Trust and Safety team here at Patreon. I want to let you know that my team and I have removed your creator page for violating our community guidelines around hate speech. So not freezing, no warning, nothing about reform, just removed. Patreon doesn't allow creators to use racial slurs as insults, except when they do. And let's not forget the F word. I bet if I look for the word faggot on Patreon, I bet it'd be everywhere on there, wouldn't it? But in a conversation with Michelle Caitlin's YouTube channel, use language we consider harmful and degrading. For this reason, your Patreon creator page was removed. I've paid up the remaining balance, blah, blah, blah." And this is the bit that I think Hugo and Jake find a little bit perplexing because they haven't followed up on this link. "In the future, if you want to start and use your page on Patreon, feel free to contact us at guidelines@patreon.com. You can read more about reinstatement here." Now, they think that means you can get your page reinstated if you just follow this process. You'll be surprised, Hugo and Jake, because I did, and they didn't. Now, clicking on that brings you to this. "My page has been taken down, what can I do? If you have received an email from the Trust and Safety team informing you that they've removed your creator page from the website, you still have a few options. The Trust and Safety team takes reported creators very seriously and does thorough research before reaching a decision." And you know what? That's actually true, as Jacqueline Hart revealed in her conversation with Matt Christiansen, but I'll get to that in a minute, Jake. That said, mistakes can be made and more context will always help reaching an informed decision. The email the team sent you will provide the reason why your account has been removed from Patreon. From there you have two choices. Appeal, which when the Trust and Safety team remove your page, you have 72 hours to contact them and counter the decision. Please provide documentation to support their claim, they'll be happy to review. Reinstatement. If your page has been removed in the past and you're hoping to start a new one, please send us a note at guidelines@patreon.com so we can review the situation. We would normally recommend to wait some time in between the final notice for removal and asking to be reinstated. As a payment processor, our investigations take time because we need to review both your new projects and your online presence as a whole. In other words, the time will allow us to make an informed decision on your case. That does not mean that we are not ready to discuss and treat each situation as a unique one, because remember, there are no fixed rules. There are no rules at all, really. It is just the capricious nature of Patreon that you now have to contend with. Remember that the first step is always contacting us, so feel free if you're in an exceptional situation, please send us a note, we'll be happy to review it. And that's what I did. But you'll notice, Jake and Hugo, that they didn't say that they would freeze my account, they removed my account, and this was before informing me of anything. This came after the removal, and they left me a boilerplate, and so I did appeal. And guess what happened next? They decided to subtly expand the use of the terminology that they had in their community guidelines. Patreon doesn't allow creators to use racial slurs as insults in content that they are funding on and through Patreon. Oh, so now we've expanded this to not just things on Patreon, which is what the terms and conditions and the guidelines say, but now it's through Patreon. So now everything I do is funded through Patreon, even though Patreon isn't all of my income, and what I was doing wasn't even on my channel. So my patrons didn't even know it was going on. So I'm not allowed a private life, I'm not allowed to do anything without it being tied to Patreon now, which, again, doesn't say that in their terms of service, but, I mean, I suppose that since they're just making it up as they're going along, that doesn't really matter, does it? I'm sure you guys feel really safe, though. I'm sure you guys have got nothing in your past that's a bit edgy, a bit racy, a bit pushing the boundaries or anything like that. I'm sure you guys are perfectly safe. We reach out to creators to let them know when a violation has taken place. Well, they didn't do that, did they? They reached out to let me know that they were terminating my account. They didn't warn me. They didn't give me any information. I certainly had no option to apologize and make good, as they told the New York Times. But again, I'm just telling you what actually has happened, rather than the lies you've been fed from the New York Times. So, after going through that appeals process, they stonewall me. So they say, to begin the appeals process, we ask creators to provide concrete evidence that would dispute our decision. I, of course, emailed them to say, well, the common sense interpretation of your guidelines is that the actual material has to be on Patreon, and even if it's not on Patreon, surely it would then have to be on my YouTube channel, which it's not, as in my power to remove even if I wanted to, which I can't. But Sydney replied to me with, I appreciate your concerns about how we go over account removals. We don't comment on the removals of other creators. Well, that's not true. That's an out-and-out lie. They've commented to everyone under the sun about my removal. So please know your account isn't the first my team has removed for a content violation that did not occur on the site. That must be awfully reassuring as well. Because we process payments, we take the creator's entire brand into account during our review. Well, that's not mentioned anywhere in the terms of service either. But I mean, we're ignoring the terms of service at this point, and for some reason you're okay with that. So I guess we'll just carry on. Your brand is funded through Patreon, partially. Calm down, Patreon. You don't have a claim to my entire life, but it doesn't matter. Let's go on. And your YouTube channel and the types of discussion you host on it contribute to this brand, except I didn't host it on my YouTube channel. They don't care about that, though. This appeals process is going really well, isn't it? They don't care about reality or their own terms of service, or the fact that they know what the context was. But anyway, we'll carry on, because this is just wonderful. This is what makes your appearances on other sites relevant to the project you fund on Patreon. Well, if they say it is, I guess it must be true. Because of this, your use of racial and homophobic slurs taking place on someone else's YouTube video factored into our decision to remove the page. To begin the appeal process, please respond with any evidence you feel explains why the language used in the conversation with Michelle Caitlin doesn't constitute hate speech. Now, I would suggest that you can't use hate speech against Nazis. I would suggest that it's not possible for one to commit an act, a hate crime, to be in violation of hate speech when insulting a Nazi. Because a Nazi isn't part of a protected group, and I think that everyone knows that. I don't think you'll find a single person who will seriously say you can actually be racist to Nazis, commit hate speech towards Nazis. But I guess that doesn't matter, does it? And that's the problem, isn't it? They know what the context was, they know who I was talking to, the Nazis, they know why I was using that language, and they know that what am I supposed to provide to them? What on earth am I supposed to say to them? that they don't already know. And that's why it's relevant why Jacqueline says, I understand who Sargon is and you know what he was trying to say, and I'm not asking him to apologise to that unsavoury group. So what on earth is the problem? She knows I wasn't denigrating black people. They know that I don't know what exactly I can provide to them to prove something they already know, and I don't see why I should continue this charade anymore. But do you think that I should have begged and pleaded with Patreon? Please, Patreon, even though you know I wasn't insulting black people, you know I was insulting Nazis, this wasn't on my channel, so it doesn't even come into your terms of service, but I guess it's okay if you just expand them arbitrarily without telling your users that that's what you're doing. Should I, in your opinion, Hugo and Jake, have begged? Is that what you would have done? Would you have got on your knees and begged and pleaded? Because, as I said, the appeals process is something I went through. I didn't just not have a dialogue with them. They know what I said and why I said it. So there's no further to go when they say, please provide proof that this isn't hate speech. You know why it's not hate speech. You do tolerate the N-word on your platform, actually on your platform. There is clearly something else going on here, Jake and Hugo. And you know this. They have lied to the New York Times. They are not telling you the truth. They know why this was done, and they know that they were stonewalling me. And you know it too now. So why are you going along with it? I can only assume it's because you have a direct financial interest. Now, that's not wrong to have that kind of financial interest. I don't begrudge you that. What I begrudge is you suggesting that Patreon did nothing wrong here. You suggesting that I am the one who has said, I'm unprepared to deal with Patreon on this. Because I tried to deal with Patreon on this, and they were utterly unreasonable. They know why this occurred, they know where it occurred, and they know that I can't even remove it if I wanted to. So they have deliberately put me in an impossible position, and she is actually expecting me to beg for my Patreon page back. Well, frankly, I'd rather not have it back if I have to beg.